Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This video is going to be for the historic best of one format. If you're looking for best of three, if you're looking for standard, explore, alchemy, brawl, check out the playlist. We try to cover them weekly. Brawl we usually do once a month or when a new set drops. But we are going to be looking at best of one. As always, we get the data from Untapped GG. For this one as well, we're looking at MTG decks for some ideas as well. As always, when I try to pull in a control deck, I go to kind of the historic control master Missman and see whatever he's playing as kind of the idea of best deck for a control deck. He specializes in that. He helps a lot of folks during the qualifier as well. He's always up in like the top 10 mythic with control decks. So if you want to get started with Untapped, link is in the video description. Paste all these deck lists as always. So don't stress, you'll be able to find everything nice and easy. So we are going to look at popularity of the day, and then we're going to be looking at the deck lists themselves. In terms of popularity right now, Izzet Wizards, head over heels, the most popular deck in the format, 30%. So 1 in 3 games is going to be against the Wizards. We see mono green, which at one point, like in the best 3 format, was upwards of 30%, down to about 9%. This mono green Elves, which actually had a comeback, in part because Bowmaster went away. We have the mono green Devotion list at 7%. We have the affinity decks, whether it be Esper, like blue white, or red white, both kind of offer different variations. But the core of the deck is the same: Esper Sentinel, Retrofitter Foundry kind of shells. We have like Angels decks, whatever generic life gain kind of strategy, the Squirrel Twin, Helio, it comes back. Azorius Control, and then Mono Red Aggro. So it's kind of noted at like Platinum to Mythic. Just gonna really check. We see like Dredge kind of come in the other formats. Upwards of Diamond is 35%, and then if we look, it's 40% in Mythic right now. So really kind of towards the top. It might be time to kind of readjust some of those cards just for balance, especially because it's doing well in both formats. If we're looking at kind of just the distribution and popularity of decks, let's add these all in. I don't know why they're all coming out, but just Wizards is consistently just kind of creeped up and up, where some of the other decks have been fairly static. So really interesting to just see Wizards being the most popular. We're looking at the volume of games played, Platinum to Mythic rank from the 18th to the 25th. We have 30,000 games of best of one played. And those Wizards, despite being a third of the matches, despite lowering their win rates from a 50-50 win rate, still putting up 64% win rate. The big thing is they can go back to consider. Card draw doesn't really hurt you. This version here is still on the static discharge plan. 3 reckless charge. There was the list from like that one, the Arena Championship or Worlds, that does play sleight of hand, the Strangle's main, no static discharge, instead 4 copies of Flame of Anor. So this is kind of recalibrated. This one's doing about 2% better. Having just like scalable damage is helpful in the artifact matchup, and then just having more cheap damage, more interaction on one, usually helps against like Esper Sentinels, Auras, stuff of that nature. But the deck's very powerful, very linear. You got to check out the companion, very explosive draws. The one thing I could see potentially just leveling this deck to kind of more reasonable levels is the Symmetry Sage, bringing it back to its original stats, de-alchemizing it. The alchemy buff was very useful to getting this archetype off the ground, but I think with the injection of new cards, just the strategy itself, this is kind of a minor tweak that kind of makes it more susceptible to like stomp and 2 points of damage without kind of completely shelving the deck. I think this is a really reasonable deck to have in the format. It's a very linear deck that keeps people honest. Otherwise, the format does revolve into kind of greed piles. Moving on, we have Gruul Goblins. So Goblins is another deck that gets slightly better in the fact that your 1-drops aren't getting hit by Bowmaster. Now, the one thing to mention, they still have the older one. Cabaret Rebels was reverted back to its pre-nerf, so it's colorless green-red now, as opposed to red-red-green. But the core of this deck is you want to kind of get Rebels out, cast a bunch of goblins that get you then some cheaper goblins. With the Skirk Prospector, you kind of net mana from you cast this, it cascades in, potentially hits you other things, gets you some mana. The Trap Finder reduces the cost of things. Goblin or Narcomancer reduces the cost of things. Goblin Influx Array does. And then what you want to try to do is chain into your bigger creatures. Matron helps you find Muxus, but you kind of get the engine going with War Chief as well as Krenko to make a bunch of tokens. And then whenever a goblin you control dies, you get to ping with Palishmon. You also could just make a very large board. You have 4 lords in Ruvenald Hordemaster, and then just alpha attack your opponent that way as well. You might see Rakdos versions come back with Crucius that always find you your Muxus. You could see mono red versions, but mostly a lot of these goblin deck have kind of settled on this Gruul version for the grindy element of it. We have elves for the first time in forever. And that is partly because now all your elves can survive. Before dies to Bowmaster, dies to Bowmaster, dies to Bowmaster. Oh, this survives, but this dies to Bowmaster, this somehow probably dies to Bowmaster, dies to Bowmaster. Kind of the theme of the deck, but this base green, but we have black in here solely for Shaman of the Pack. Really good hit to get off of either Court Calling or Collected Company. That allows you to drain your opponent equal to the number of elves you control. Now, this is really impactful because against 9 live Solemnity locks, that cares about damage, not life loss. So this circumvents that. It also gets around the ring's protection, where this is life loss. So kind of a cool inclusion there. You have your Elvish Archdruids for mana ramp, Marwyn, your copy of Craterhoof on the top end to kind of overrun. Allosaurus Shepherd as well as the Warmaster are both big mana sinks that kind of go crazy. This is a deck that can operate off very few lands and generate huge amounts of mana thanks to the Archdruid and Marwyn kind of mixed in. Very susceptible to kind of sweepers, but it is basically answer it or you die type deck. From one green deck to the next, we go to Mono Green Devotion. The big thing here, and I think it's worth probably revising, we see the numbers increase a little, but I actually think it's probably okay to go back up to more numbers of the Elvish Mystics over the Delighted Halfling. It's really dependent on what you're seeing in the format. I think in Best of One, there's fewer counterspell decks, and just being able to consistently have the mana for Old Growth Troll has its advantage. Whereas the Delighted Halfling makes you colorless mana, it protects for at least the Old Growth Troll. It does make your Kiora and Karns and Nissa's uncounterable, so there's that bonus, but just a lot of early ramp, basically build up your devotion, use Kiora with Nykthos to generate a whole bunch of mana, play Cavaliers, storm the festivals, basically just tap to untap, tap untap Nykthos, generate a huge amount of mana. Then Karn finds you silver bullets and Graveyard Hate, Lifelink, Trample, blow up their lands, taxing effects, can't lose the game, blow up stuff, and then force sack out of your opponent, and then reanimate their stuff. So very powerful deck. A little bit softer in Best of One because the format does tend to be a little bit more aggressive. It does have a bad matchup against Wizards, and we've seen Wizards being one of the most represented decks, so something to keep in mind if you do want to sleeve this deck up. You then go to Dimir Dredge. So this is Dimir, you could call it Sultai if you want to get technical, that it plays one half green card that doesn't really get played for green. But the core of this deck is Self-Mill. Secret Keeper puts cards in your graveyard, Otherworldly Gaze, Stitcher Supplier. Lots of ways to kind of put stuff into your graveyard. And then from there, what you are doing is reanimating. So lands get Bloodghast back, Narcomoeba comes back from just milling. Silver Smoke Ghoul comes back if you gain 3 or more life, which is free casting off Creeping Chill. Amalgam comes back if any of your other creatures come back. So kind of just self-mill and then get stuff into play for free that you eventually attack in. There's a lot of redundancy in this deck. You're good against traditional sweepers. You're bad against things like Divine Purge or Farewell. And then just targeted removals, not necessarily great because you can easily get stuff back. Wonder allows you to also get evasion by having your swamps in play. Your islands, not swamps. So I'm going to cover a couple other decks. So not a huge record of games played with Enchantress right now, but I think this is a deck that does get better post Bowmaster. So Bowmaster punishes draws. Enchantress really wants to draw. But with the deck here, you have things like Sithis that basically cycles whenever you cast an enchantment, gains you life. Destiny Spinner for uncounterable. Sanctum Weaver as a way to generate huge amounts of mana. And now you have things like Utopia Sprawl as another cheap mana accelerant. And then basically, Sterling Grove lets you toolbox. You have things like Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate, Ossification for Catch-All Removal, Vanishing Light, a second draw engine in Enchantress's presence. A really strong start is like Utopia Sprawl into presence. You have the lock, so combination of Solemnity as well as 9 lives or Phyrexian Unlife basically means you can't take damage anymore. You can lose life, but you can't take damage. So you could effectively lock your opponent out in some matches. So things like Wizards can't beat you. Things like Elves, now that they have the Drain, can beat you, but Creature Combat can't. Mono Green needs to find a way to blow up your enchantments with like Boseijus, otherwise they can't win. Dredge can't win. So little things like that. Sealed Existence is removal, and then Gauntlet of Might. Basically with this, you're not playing it for its power cause, you're basically playing this for its last mode. Untap target creature for 3 mana. So with the Sanctum Weaver, if you could generate 4+ mana, you could basically untap, tap, generate infinite mana, play through your deck. And then what you're trying to do is basically just draw into your copies of Approach the Second Sun, you win through that, or just animate very large creature lands with Destiny Spin. So that's kind of a deck there. Folks have been asking about Yawgmoth post-ban. So this list went 121 and 48 in best of 3 as of October 13th, so within the last 2 weeks post-ban. So just kind of looking at the shell, likely most of the best of 1 decks were basically mirrors to the best of 3. The big thing that's kind of happened in here is they're playing Elven Chorus over the Bowmasters. So a Chorus lets you play cards off the top of your library if they're creatures, and your creatures add mana. We also see some copies of Agatha's Soul Cauldron to duplicate the activated abilities of like Yawgmoth in the deck, Chord and Eldritch Evolution to find you your copies of Yawg, a Tyvar in here, and then things like Halflings in here. You have some accelerants between Mystic, the Gilded Goose, just more early accelerant, and then you kind of get the Young Wolf combo. 2 Young Wolves can target each other with the sack to kind of undo Undying. And Patra also makes you kind of an extended board. Prosperous Innkeeper offsets the life gain. Zulaport Cutthroat and Blood Artist basically let you drain out your opponent that way there. One tech that you may want to consider in the main board if you're kind of porting this over. So Rasta comes in against the Wizards matchup because it lets you create reach blockers. It's a 3/5, which is reasonable against Wizards on its own, and then it makes more blockers in that case. So that might be some tech you want to bring into the best of 1 if you want to kind of pre-board for Wizards. We then go, so I think Auras is a reasonable deck in best of 1. You have a lot of protection spells, a lot of kind of value, and it can just overrun folks. This list went 63 and 25 in best of 3, but kind of the shell is the same. Sentinels, Giver of Ruins, Selfless Savior, kind of all your protection, card advantage package. 4 Spirit Dancer and Light Paws as your 2 creatures. Surge of Salvation for protection, especially against red-based burn. Recommission as a regrowth kind of effect. And then just a smattering of enchantments. Cartouche gives you another creature for a strike and a bonus of power. Zeal gives haste, so you can kind of cheese out your opponent out of nowhere. And the thing is why they're playing so many 1-ofs in this deck is because the Light Pause lets you kind of pseudo-tutor for whatever silver bullet you want. Combat Research for card advantage. Escape Velocity is another haste enabler that can be rebought out of the graveyard. Armor is kind of the big one that boosts up your power based on the number of enchantments. Flaring Aegis taps down a creature, so it gets rid of a blocker. Griff's Bloom for flying. Immolation can be used as pseudo-removal or a boost. Ghost Form's a big one that gets around kind of removal or exile. Sentinel's Eye for vigilance, Sticky Fingers for menace and gives you some treasures, and then Staggering Insight for lifelink and card draw. And then you just kind of play like card draw lands, Mana Confluence, kind of play the offsetted lands, and then you have Luris as your companion. And then lastly, so I was playing Mistman's Blue-White Control that was modified for best of 1, and he's recently taken to Jeskai, and like I was watching him this week, he got to at least number 5. I think he might have cracked number 4 Mythic and best of 3. But this is a Snapcaster Mage. One of the big call with Jeskai is you get access to Lightning Helix, which is very strong against. Sorry, getting used to the site. Very strong against the Wizards deck, and it kills all their creatures, gains you life, which is the big thing. Snapcaster lets you kind of rebuy that, and then it lets you kind of also just play a more aggressive game in the control matchups because you have kind of reach in there. Fragment Realities, Change the Equations, Reprieves, Archmage Charms, and it kind of mixed into there. Teferi's kind of your other win condition. 2 copies of the Ring, Expressive Iteration for card advantage, and then a sweeper package, 2 Divine Purge, 1 Supreme Verdict, 2 Farewells. You have a Castle, Arden Vale, and a Hall of the Storm Giants in the mana base as additional ways to win the game there. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.